is how we all sort of head up towards this 10 1/4, and most of us stay around there. We're kind of constrained by our social needs to stay at that point. But nature does make us actually go faster. We probably could keep going faster if the rest of the group, most adults were fast. We would just keep going faster until we hit that speed. And that's what this is showing, how a lot of us will continue, well, not a lot of us, but like maybe a third of people or a quarter will continue after age 10, and they go into what I call the adolescent speeds, and they'll go up to they'll go up to 11s and 12s. Most of them will return back. It takes them probably about at least a decade to return back. Not always. We can, with neurofeedback, we can help push them, compel them, I should say, to that more optimal adaptive speed of 10 1/4. So that's what most adults will go. Some, though, especially I see in self-employed individuals, often don't have the pressure. They stay in their own rate. They stay in the adolescent speed. If you're in a field that needs you to be a juvenile mind, like the arts or technology, keep your mind young and curious, you often will stay up there in the high 11s and 12s. We do see a decline over age as we hit our 6th decade or 5th and 6th decade and beyond. We will see decline typically. And again, the reason why we want to get to that 10 1/4 because most individuals will be there around that rate, and you'll get misinformation, mischaracterization of information if you're not sampling the world at the same rate as others. Okay, so in her case, she started off, she's 25 years old, but she's still kind of like an adolescent. She started off at more adolescent speed, and you can see getting closer to slowing down, in essence. A better way to see it in some respect is in the spectral plots. These are the same 19 regions. These are the top 2. And then you get back, here's the bottom, 18, 19. This is your perceptual regions, where you're the visual perception. This is your decision-making, emotional regulation. This is processing words. There's motor and body function there. And attention's over here. This is actually an older configuration. We have a newer configuration where we put everything on the left and it belongs on the left and everything on the right that belongs on the right. But this is an older configuration where we just, because we're in 3-dimensional space, we have to just stack things together. But what you can see over those 3 months, look at that, we want more alpha activity. This is during an eyes closed condition. It's all about what you do during the recording. That's important. If we're asking them to do some kind of, catch a ball or do some math problems, we like a different signature than what we see. But during an eyes closed, resting condition, when you ask to just let your mind wander, we want to see this. That's what we want to see. That's almost perfect. So attention was almost perfect in the beginning. Decision making, no, not much. We don't have much alpha up there. We'd like it to look almost like that. It can look like that. The amount of energy to like the left of 6 is either the reptilian system being dominant or literally a measure of decortication, meaning that the person is just sort of in their head like a child, not really expecting what the world should be like, instead of letting what is truly about the world happening, coming in. And you can see, look at it, that's a nice decline there, and that's the verbal system. And we got that alpha popping in all these areas. That's very nice. This is the hardest system to change. This is what we call the sensory system. The response system, as we divided it up in the beginning here, is much easier to change. It takes great easy direction. This is the sensory system, is what we're looking at there, which is we can see in the activity of the brain, and the response system we see in the connectivity, and that's coming up. It's right below that. Okay, so that's our first figure. This is more summary, helpful text there, and then we're going to duplicate. Normally we just show the dominant frequency tables. I just want to put it down, this figure next to it, but this is where the figure normally goes. And now we go to the response system, and so this response system, here's the legend for it. We do not want orange. This is the color we do not want. Orange means that it's functional transparency. It means the neocortex is not doing its job, just letting the subcortex through. It's a hypersimilarity, and you see orange. Blue means a complete loss of similarity, as if it's being blocked. The subcortex is being blocked. But we need to have, if you listen to my other videos, we have what's called relational thinking. We start off all relational when we're reptilian. Part of our brain is in control, and then we can let the neocortex in and become more recognizing things are independent of us. Object thinking, it's called. And we want to balance. We don't want to be completely and think everything's independent of us, because we alter the world through our action. So we want some relational thinking, mix. We want a balance point. We don't want to be all reason or all instinct or emotion. We want a balance point there, and go to green. And this is all statistical. It's about, this is the healthy group, and the healthy group we're being compared to they're better than the general population. They're all college educated. Half of them have grad degrees. When you actually get educated, put mental effort into your dedicated, committed to yourself, you will actually slow down your connectivity. We see this, and so there'll be a reduction of connectivity. You're literally gonna be neotness, which is the fancy word for saying a younger mind, and that's why this is a younger mind in essence. We want to get to that point. It's actually a normal age 29, and the good thing is we can get people to that point, even regardless of their age. Okay, so now let's look at the system again now, the response system. And on the left is the previous map, and on the right is the, well, it's not most recent one. It's after neurotherapy. This is actually usually a mid-map too. We typically, the maps are not being, we're not being sponsored by government agencies, so the funding is being, it's coming from the individual, and so it's being used purpose to help them. So the first map is a pre-map before they got training. How's the current state? The next map is it's not a post map. It's a post so many hours, but it's a mid map or late mid map, meaning that we're probably going to do 40 hours for most people. It depends how severe the problem is. Sometimes 20, sometimes it'll be 50 or 60. But after we take a picture after about 30 hours of training to see where to dedicate the remaining 10 hours or 15 hours or whatever it's called for. So we don't want this orange here. This orange is singlet. When you see the orange like that, it's usually a sign of anxiety and depression. It's associated even with psychotic risk. It's we all say this. It's down here in what's called the neuromarkers. Let me bring it into view. All the elements, and there's only two more neuromarkers we see. Now, what is a neuromarker? A neuromarker mean that we feel really confident saying what is the likely problem or issues that emerges from from a map that looks like that. From here, the singlets being yellow. That's what how hyperunity refers to is yellow. We actually have a second neuromarker that can be from the first map there, and that is this one here. When the left or right auditory cortices are showing yellow or extreme amount of blue, it's a sign. It can be a sign of. Doesn't necessarily. It can be a sign of stress. Typically, a sign of stress. Sometimes blue means you put more energy into that function. I was talking about more reason, and sometimes that could be for good reason. You're a writer, and you put more energy into your auditory system because that's where your mental effort goes much of the time. But it can also be a sign of distress. Why are you having to constantly put more energy into that location? Is it because you're under some challenges? We found out left physical and verbal challenges. The right, it'd be more emotional, social, and sexual challenges. And it can even be a sign of what you call sensitive, but not specific to abuse. Meaning, if you had abuse, those markers will show. But the marker shows doesn't necessarily mean you had abuse. You may just have current stress, and that's why in this PowerPoint, the last slide I was talking about is how things are. These markers are sensitive but not specific. And what I mean by that, if you show the marker, you may have the problem. Doesn't mean definitively have a problem. And I use the example of white fur. If you see white fur on an animal in front of you, it may be a polar bear, but it doesn't mean it's always a polar bear. What's really going on is this problem we have found in the PCCs for trauma. We often see this marker. It means someone may have a neuromarker means associated with PTSD or developmental trauma or even addiction. Doesn't mean that's how it's going to manifest in their behavior. It does mean their brain is vulnerable to those problems coming up. But it's same thing with now going back to the auditory. It's sensitive, not specific, meaning that you may have had the problems, but if you show the marker, it's not definitively saying you had the problem. Okay. On the right side, we describe the general functions associated with these areas. Now, you're going to have fewer neuromarkers because we've learned that comes about from learning from the cases we've had before, where and looking at the scientific literature, what these things mean. Now, for instance, the the markers, we didn't mention the markers here because we knew the case. Also, you got to be sensitive to what's going on in that person's case, and this person bringing up childhood abuse was not going to be helpful in this person because of for various reasons. But the so it wasn't as severe as it could be, but it is present. In other cases, it might be mentioned. But either way, you can see we normalized it, normalized especially on the left side. So there'll be fewer neuromarkers because that comes about from, like I said, literature and empirically from cases. And we've had a lot of depressed cases, a lot of anxious cases showing this yellow. We've learned this is blocks learning. People are too egocentric. Now, it is interesting. You'll see that in some times yellow areas can help your profession. They will mess up your personal life because they're going to be letting the reptile part of your brain, and the reptile system thinks it's me versus everyone else. There's no group mindedness. There's no positive sense of a group or social group. Sometimes you need to have that that unique perspective. Let's say if you were going to be a film director, you may want that, but you're not going to want it in cases where you're trying to get along in an office or trying to be, in most cases it would still mess you up. And it's amazing then you had that marker that you would actually be able to maintain healthy relationships because you're going to always sort of dictate. It's a dictator marker. You can say what has to be going on. Okay, now, so we do say what other functions are generally served by these areas, and we don't want yellow in most cases. But we don't really have neuromarkers for all of them because they haven't manifested clearly in our evaluations of people to show that, oh, that's going to be a problem. We have seen, for instance, orange occipitals show up in autistics, but they can show up for other reasons. And so that hasn't hit the threshold of evidence to really put that one down. But that would be that's coming close because we're getting more and more data. We need examples of those with autism and those without to really, a few more to be certain about that.